Hi, everyone. It's Deb Blum here, and I am so excited that I have David Richards on the line with me, and we're going to do a great interview today. Hi, David.
Hello, hello. Thank you for having me.
I am so glad to have you. It's so fun to talk to you. We've been having great conversations offline, but it's just so fun to have a conversation online,
Yes.
recorded. And so David and I, it turns out that you and I met a while back through
hmm
Dr. Shafali's Year of Awakening or Year of Manifestation. I'm not sure which one.
Yeah.
Yeah. And then more recently, though, we connected to become Facebook friends and have a lot of common friends. And it's
hmm
just been so great. And you and I both launched similar initiatives, not exactly the same, but similar
Yeah.
initiatives almost
Yeah.
at the exact same time. Yours is called Heart of the Matter. Mine is Inside Out Activism.
hmm
And so it's so fun. And that's sort of how we ended up connecting a little bit more formally and
Yeah.
establishing this great friendship. So
It's
it's great to,
beautiful.
yeah,
I'm
it's
so
so,
excited.
yeah, me too. So I would love to just give you a moment to share about you, anything that you want to share that feels really relevant right now.
Yeah, I think the thing that feels most relevant is I'm a dad. I'm a dad of a 6-and-a-9-year-old, 6-year-old girl and a 9-year-old boy. And I say that feels really relevant because I have been given the gift. I was gonna say forced. I've been given the gift to homeschool them or be at home with them every day. And the funny part about that story is that I have really thought about homeschooling, even though my other hat is an educator. So I've spent the last 20 years as a teacher, a principal, an executive director, a founder and CEO in the charter school world. But I've also spent time in traditional public school, suburban, urban, mainly in the Bay Area, but also lived abroad in Mexico and Costa Rica and worked in private schools there. I worked in
Mm,
private schools in the Bay Area. So I've kind of seen all the angles of the education system, public and private,
right.
and also with my own children. So they attend the school that I started, which is called Growth Public Schools, and it's here in Sacramento, California. And so I've seen all the different angles, and I have really thought about how my whole life has been how my whole career in education has been like, how do we make this system really work for kids? Because it didn't work for me as a child. And I grew up in Santa Barbara, which is a very affluent area, but there's always the haves and the have-nots. And I was in the have-nots of Santa Barbara. And the school system just didn't work for the have-nots. And so I've always had this really deep mission around how do I serve kids like me that were not given the resources, at home, and the educated parents and stuff like that, just to allow them to be successful in life. So that's why I started my teaching career in Oakland. And now here in Sacramento, I actually drive my kids from the nice neighborhood over to the to the area that's a little more working class. People are like scratching their head, like, why do you do that? You're like 5 blocks from, one of the best elementary schools in Sacramento County. And then I explained to them that I think that the system is outdated and we need to really reimagine how we're educating our children. So that's all the stuff that I do. And then in addition to that, I'm a coach. So I do leadership coaching and life coaching. So I also have that, which is a business that I just launched about 6 months ago. And then I'm also doing a new project, like you talked about, called Heart of the Matter, which is leading a conscious way forward. So it's reimagining not only our school system, but how we lead and how we are together in humanity. And then how are we going to heal through this really massive historic moment with COVID-19? And so just have a few things going on, but
Just a couple.
it's just the way I live my life. I'm always kind of like following the truths and following the flow and trying to show up as my most authentic self so that I can really reflect out to the world the projects that I feel most passionate about. So that's all the things I'm working on in a nutshell.
In a nutshell. Yeah. It's so great. I don't think I heard all of your story, and I now feel like I understand a little bit more about what you're up to. And so
Yeah,
I'm just glad that I know that about you.
thank you. Yeah, I'm
Yeah.
just really thankful that you're giving me this opportunity to speak and share more about myself, because as we talked about, I've been interviewing a lot of people for my podcast, and it's great to be on the other end and share your story. So thank you for the opportunity. I really do appreciate it.
Yeah, then and thanks for being willing. I think it's really great, and I love that your story includes so many, it's been kind of like a little bit of a straight line in the sense that you have been in education, and leadership, but
Yeah.
that it's also been a bit of a squiggly line in that you've been
Yeah.
in many different dimensions of it.
Yeah.
And I have this, great appreciation for that you've not only been an educator and a principal, but you've started schools, that you've been in the
Hmm.
leadership and you've also been in
Yeah.
the trenches, and you just
Yeah.
have so much. And then I also think it's pretty cool that, you contemplated homeschooling and that here you are now in this space where you get to even,
Yes.
you get to see like, even that you get to say
I
like,
know.
wow, like life is
Hmm.
really, truly an experiment.
Yes. 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 And I forgot to add that I I was the first I am the first one in my family to go to college. And I also have the background of I started at Santa Barbara City College. So I started at community college and I actually spent 5 years there because my high school experience was so abysmal in terms of preparing me for college that I redid high school. At that time it was $13 a unit. So I
Wow.
left my house when I was 17 and I got a full-time job at Blockbuster Video. And I worked 50 hours a week at Blockbuster Video. And then I went to school 8 to 8 on Tuesday and Thursdays. Did that for 5 years. And then I was able to transfer to UC Berkeley, where they pick 500 kids that are on the border. So my GPA was 3.3, which nowadays I don't know if you'd ever be able to get into Berkeley with that GPA, but I started with a 2.0 and I ended with a 4.0. So they saw the
Wow.
promise and they're like, oh, this kid's interesting. So they put 500 applications aside and they tell you, if you're willing to come in January when 500 people leave, we're going to take a bet on you. We're going to take a chance on you. So I was like, yeah, UC Berkeley, I'll wait till January. So it was like
Wow.
5.5 years until I started undergraduate studies. And then, so I saw, education through the eyes of first generation college student in like a big public institution. And then from there, I ended up moving to DC with my wife, and we lived in London and DC and kind of exploring the world in my 20s, and just kept coming back to, I taught Spanish for one semester after I got back from studying abroad in Costa Rica. And then I left because it was so hard, because teaching is really hard when you have that many kids and you don't get a lot of support. So I left and spent 7 years doing banking and public relations. And every time I was just wishing that I could be back with the kids. So at night I would tutor kids and I would coach basketball, and I'd like rush out of the office to get to basketball and tutoring. And I was like, I should actually be doing this for a career. But all the conditioning told me, you have too many school loans, you can't afford it. Like you grew up poor. Why would you want to keep being poor as a teacher? And then when I was 30 years old, I was in DC and I was tutoring Ethiopian immigrants in not the nicer neighborhood of, greater DC. And it was my favorite hour of the week. I would go there from 6 to 7, and then I was supposedly teaching them English, but we were just having these amazing conversations about life. And then I found Martha Beck's book, Finding Your Own North Star. And I had just turned 30, and I was working at a restaurant by the White House, like a block from the White House. And there was a Borders 2 blocks, 17th and L. And I went into the Borders and I was exhausted. I left the restaurant at 4 o'clock and said, I can't work today. My soul was so tired. So I went into the Borders and I found this book. It's like one of those stories where it found me.
It like fell off the shelf.
Yeah. So I went and I looked at it and I sat down on the floor until they closed at 10 o'clock or whatever, and read the whole thing cover to cover. And at that moment I was like, I'm going to go and become a teacher. And I ended up going to Stanford University, and everybody that I talked to was like, why would you quit your high paying bank job to go make less money? Like, they were so confused. All the people that worked in, high powered DC they're so confused by my choice. And I just kept saying, just following the call.
Yeah.
And that's what I'm supposed to do. So, and then I've loved every moment of it since then.
Now what you're doing that's really cool though is you're blending the two.
Yes,
You
the
know.
business and the education. Yeah, and the entrepreneurialism. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, what a fun story, and such an inspiration for people who are contemplating that. There are a lot of people out there who are maybe thinking that they would like to follow their hearts and follow their
Yeah.
passion, but they feel like there's judgment from other people, or
Mm-hmm.
even just that there is the sacrifice that you make, a financial sacrifice.
Yes.
So, but it's pretty cool that you took the leap and that you don't
Yeah,
regret it.
I don't regret it. And I think it's such a really great story about when you follow your path. So a lot of people said to me, oh, you're going to be broke as a teacher.
Mm.
And I knew that I wanted to be financially comfortable based on my childhood. So I that was my biggest concern, is that, and I actually did end up paying $50,000 to go to Stanford for a year to get like a 12-month master's in a teaching credential. And then I got a job in Oakland Unified that paid $37,000. So,
Mhm.
and my salary at the bank was a lot more than $37,000. So it was,
Yep.
there were a lot of moments where I was like, if I listen to the advice from people that are supposedly more wise than me, people that were saying like, you should get your career set and get your 9 to 5 and start your 403B or 401k. And if I listened to those people, I'd still be working at the bank. And I just took the
Yeah.
risk, and I really felt like if that at this time I have the language, like the universe will provide. Back then, I just intuitively felt like this is where I'm supposed to be, and I just have to figure it out. And then what ended up happening was I ended up within 5 years becoming a principal and having a much more stable salary, and then ended up becoming an executive director and made more money. So it's like I have never had financial struggle based on this choice. In fact, it's the
Right.
opposite. Like it just all unfolded so beautifully. And I think that's as I'm going through my journey now, I feel like, oh, I have these moments where I have to remind myself that, when I was 17 and I had nothing and I just got a job at Blockbuster, and when I was 30 and I had nothing, and all these periods in my life where I actually did just take the leap. But
Yeah.
as I've gotten more conditioned and more middle class and more comfortable, it's like, oh, but I need the nice house and I need the nicer clothes. I'm like, we don't need any of those things. In this moment with COVID, my wife's like really getting irritated with me because I keep telling her, let's sell everything. Let's literally sell everything and get in the car and just drive. I'm like, well, we can't because we're in shelter in place. But if it wasn't for that, I would be in the car right now with my children. It's like, let's just get rid of all these material attachments that we think we need because I want to shed everything. And that's how I started when I was 17. And I was much happier when I was 17 than, when I, in some of the places with all the items that I thought I needed when I was in my 40s.
Yeah, that's pretty awesome. I think that there are a lot of people who are going through that right now,
Yeah.
looking at what's essential, what's not essential. Yeah,
Yes.
but I also think it's just pretty amazing to highlight that it's it might look scary.
Mm-hmm.
And it is true. You
Oh,
might
yeah.
have had earning potential that was double what you were making or something, but
Yeah.
that you weren't living, in a condition that wasn't livable.
Yeah.
And that you did actually what seemed like it was going to be some form of maybe suffering financially
Yeah.
ended up playing out fine.
Yeah.
And I think that a lot of times we do get the fear-based stories that get
Yeah.
imposed on us. And
Yeah.
actually, when we follow our path, you can find your way. Now, I know that there have been people who are like musicians and artists who like the starving artists, and
Yeah.
it's so
Yeah.
it's not as if oh, everyone's just going to be as successful as you are, and if they do
No.
it, and
Yeah.
so it's complicated, but it's
Yeah.
also
Absolutely.
important to follow. And when I'm working with my clients, I say to them, well, let's deal with both. Can we hold both? What's
Mm,
your
yeah.
immediate need for finances?
Yeah.
And what's your bigger vision? How can we hold the bigger vision for you of where you want to go and where your soul is
Yes.
sort of calling you?
Yes.
But
Yes.
but it might mean that you actually do need to do a 9 to 5 job for right now to make enough money to be able
Yes.
to get that dream. But like you don't have to. It's not either or. It's really
I
not either
totally
or.
agree. Yeah. And I really appreciate you sharing that because that's the masculine energy in me. It's like, just quit your job, let's go, but and I have to also understand that because I grew up with so little and I was able to scrap and always I can live on nothing. Like that's normal for me. Like part of my conditioning is living on nothing. And
Yeah.
so that's easier for me to think about. Like my wife struggles with the thought of just having nothing because obviously she hasn't been in the places, not obvious, but she hasn't been in the places that I've been. So for me, it's kind of like, yeah, this is and like you said, so for some people it's it might take you 5 or 10 years to do that job as a musician or something to pay the basic wages or whatever you might need. I will say for me, when I was in, I love basketball. I'm a huge basketball fan. And so my family knows like every gift I ever get some basketball thing. So that's always been my passion since I was a kid. And when I was in 7th or 8th grade, I used to diagram out basketball plays. And one of my coaches, his brother, played for Kansas University under Roy Williams. So if you know anything about college basketball, that's like, these are really Roy Williams is known as one of the best coaches. He used to coach with Dean Smith. And so I got the, like, some of the plays from this coach, and I would diagram them out. So intuitively, I always felt like I want to be a coach. And so my whole life, the thread has been the coach. And I wanted to be a college basketball coach, and I wanted to play college basketball, but I never played. And so I had this story of lack, that like, oh, I never played basketball, so I'm not a real basketball player, this and that. But the through line is that I always felt, and I hope people listening will have these same feelings, I always felt like I should be a coach. So when I went to become a teacher, it was actually because I was like, how can I get paid to do what I love? So I was like, well, I could be a high school basketball coach and make enough money to pay the rent. And I'll just do teaching because it's on the side. And then I realized that I really love teaching and coaching. And so throughout my life, I've always been a coach. And every single aspect of what I'm doing, I've been some version of a coach. And when you do my numerology, and when you look at pick your strengths finders, pick your test, it always says that I'm a born coach and teacher. And so my soul was telling me that throughout my whole entire life. It was just a question of what path was I going to take that got me in that seat. So maybe it's not quitting your job and becoming, a musician overnight, but it's like finding what your real love is, and then aligning yourself with that as you go forward. And it doesn't mean you have to lose your salary and change your whole entire life drastically.
So I think that that's a really important thing, that I'll even bring one more level of nuance to it, which is
Yeah,
that not everybody needs to quit their job to follow their passion.
absolutely.
Some people are going to just work their job and they're going to be fine, and they're just going to, they're okay. It's not soul
Yep.
sucking. I think the problem is when it's
Yes.
soul sucking, but I think
Yes.
sometimes it's soul sucking because we have a story in our head that's soul
Yes.
sucking,
Yes.
and so
Yes.
some people, it's like, you might have to do that job.
Yeah.
And it might not be the job that is your soul path, but you might be able to get an attitude about it. Like,
Yes.
an example, like, you might have to work in a job where you don't have a choice. You're going to be, working at Blockbuster, but you might bring your coaching into
Oh, I love
everything
working at
you
Blockbuster.
do. Yeah.
That's what's
Right.
funny about this story is I loved all the jobs I had, but I always had this story like, oh, I'm going to be this stuffy banker.
Yeah.
I'm this, so I always felt like I wanted to get out. But then there was part story and part reality. Like, it was very stuffy for me to be in a 9-to-5 job wearing a suit, but I coached everybody. I
Yeah.
would coach people, everybody I interacted with. It was like, oh, what's your exercise routine? Oh, what are you doing today? Oh, wait a minute, you should be doing this job. Like, I just always did that. And that's how I kept myself really alive, but I love that nuance. Yeah, what's the attitude you take to the job you have? And I think about that show, what is it, CEO Rescue CEO, whatever, the one on where the CEO,
I don't think
undercover
I've seen
CEO,
this. Oh
and they
yeah, I
go
did see that
undercover,
one.
and then they find the person that cleans the toilets or whatever, that just has this like zest for their job. And I absolutely agree, because if I go back to my life, if I didn't have the story of like, oh, I don't like this job, I would have enjoyed life so much more, because I loved working as a bank teller. I did that
Mm,
throughout college. Why I loved it? Because it was community. The same people come all the time,
yeah.
and I got to know them. And then I had all my friends that worked there that were in college with me, and the little lady down the street that we'd always walk out the door. I mean, it was beautiful. It was like this little, with the bank, you get the same people coming in over and over again. So there's all these things that I didn't appreciate when I was younger, that now I'm like, oh, you should have appreciated that more.
Yeah, well, right, but there's something else happening too, which is that, we think we know the threads of our lives, but it's
Right.
only in, upon, like, often it's in retrospect that we can see, wow, like,
Mm-hmm.
I did this, I did these things, and actually if I hadn't done those things,
Yes.
I wouldn't have been able to be doing this thing. And so
Yes.
it's sort of like, I think there's some level of embracing the mystery of it,
Yes.
and also sort of taking ownership of it. It's like,
Absolutely.
how do you dance in both spaces? And you
Yes.
might not have ever been able to create the life that you have right now if you had
Oh, no.
tried to do every bit of it, but
No.
some of it was allowing, and some of it was like a, action. So it's
Yeah.
that masculine and the feminine, both of them.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I used to play this game with my high school students that I taught, like, what jobs did I have that are real? There's actually a Facebook one going around like this. I used to play this game where it's like, I listed 10 jobs that I had that were real and 10 jobs that weren't real. And the kids would be so intrigued, because it's like, I was a janitor. My sister, when she was in, when she was trying to support herself and pay the bills, she would clean offices, and she would take me in as a 14-year-old, and she paid me like $5. Now I'm like, that was not enough money. I would do like 4 hours of work. But I put like, I was a janitor. I did door-to-door newspaper subscriptions when I was 12, like all these jobs, and the kids would be so intrigued, and they would always be like, what, but you're from Stanford, like, what do you mean you were a janitor? I'm like, well, you can't judge a book by its cover. And so I think it's amazing to think about all those different pieces that and I think about it now, it's like, I've always been a coach. I've coached all different ages. I've now worked with, I've opened 10 schools in 10 years. That's the one thing that I like to share with people, because it's like, who does that? Like,
No,
as
who really does
a
that? Just
teacher,
you.
as a principal. So I just have this, and I'm not opening anymore unless the board can't anymore. But as I went through that process, I realized, like, oh wow, it's like literally I had to figure out who was going to clean the school. So that experience of being a janitor helps me not only have the knowledge to know how to find the right person, but it gives me the empathy and the understanding of what it's like to come in every night and where you feel like the bottom of the totem pole. And I used to steal people's candy. That's what I did to have power as a 14-year-old while I was cleaning up their mess. I would take their little candies off their desk, and I felt so rebellious. So I was like, I'm cleaning up after you. I'm taking your candies. But it's like all those experiences, being at Blockbuster at 19 and having to tell somebody, like, you're not doing your job very well and I might have to fire you. It's like when I was 19 as an assistant manager, because my manager said, this person needs to be fired and now it's your job. I'm like, what? So all these experiences have led to what I'm doing now. And every single moment has led to this, and it's a way to see that it's all unfolding the way it should. And it's not something that should have been different.
Yeah, it's really cool. I think there's such beauty in your story for people to just know that. I think there are a couple things. One is how easy it is to have a perception that, like, oh, you went to Stanford and you're an educator, and so you must not be able to relate to other people. And so that's one thing, is just to remember not to judge a book by its cover, as you said. I think there's also something beautiful about valuing that all these little things that to someone else could look like maybe it's like beneath them or something like that, they've contributed. And I feel the same way for my life. I started out doing, babysitting, and I did newspaper delivery, and then I worked at Burger King, and then I was a hostess at a restaurant, and all these things
skills.
that I did. Yeah. And like I had to work during college as well. So I worked at the college bookstore, and I loved having my older people there, that I had all these like mommy figures that I was working with, and I loved the community and I loved all of that. And without each one of those things, I wouldn't be me.
Exactly.
And they were all part of the path for me, and none of them were like bad. And I even say right now, it's so easy for me to, if we were ever in a crisis, and like, let's just say we needed health insurance or something like that, it would be so simple for me I could absolutely be like, I'll go work at Starbucks.
Yeah, me
like
too.
Nothing feels beneath me. I mean, well, maybe a couple things feel beneath me because
good point. But for the most part, like barista, I could do that.
Right. Well, if I have a choice, if I have no choice, nothing's beneath me. If I have to feed my children, nothing's beneath me.
Absolutely.
But right now I have the choice. And so if I have the choice, I'm not necessarily going to do everything. And I might say, oh, well, I actually would rather not clean my house. I am cleaning my house right now. And I have never had so much appreciation for my amazing person who cleans my house.
Yes. No, we are too. We're having the kids do it with us. And we're kind of like, we want to keep supporting this wonderful woman that cleans our house, but we're still paying her. But then it's like, but when this is all, cleared up or whatever, then are we going to keep making, because now the kids are like, they're understanding. I'm like, gosh, I don't want to have kids that are so spoiled. They don't even know what it's like to clean a toilet.
Totally. But, it is interesting. But we were all going through it together, because I haven't cleaned a toilet in a long time either. So it was really nice to be,
humbling.
to have my kids be cleaning the toilet, but being like, dude, listen, I'm not loving cleaning the toilet either, but I'm also loving having a clean toilet.
Yeah, exactly.
So I'm kind of like, your floor is gross and it's kind of disgusting. Like, if you clean your floor, it will feel so nice when you get in walk in the bathroom at night. So it's kind of like one of those things that, it's nothing is beneath. I feel like for me, nothing is beneath me. And yet I also deeply, deeply acknowledge and appreciate where I am in my life.
Yes.
That I don't have to do everything.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly.
All right. Well, so I love, so you have so many cool things. We could probably talk about oh my gosh, so many things. And this first part of this about you and your path is so inspiring.
Yeah. Thank you.
Yeah, but let's spend some time talking about where you are now and
Yeah,
what you're looking at doing and why you're even inspired to do what you're doing. I mean, you're in this space as I see it, as you're wanting to be in the conversation about how to reimagine
yeah,
leadership and reimagine education.
yeah.
That's a very cool place to be. It's a
Oh my
very
gosh,
cool place to
I
be.
can't even, I'm like, I can feel myself getting excited. Whenever I'm on the phone with somebody and I start wanting to dance, I'm like, oh, you're talking to my soul. Okay, let's go. Let's
All
go. We're
right.
ready. Well, yeah, I think that the story goes back. So I have these like decade stories, like when I turned 30, when I turned 40. When I turned 40, I was working at this amazing organization called Summit Public Schools, which when I started as a teacher, they had, they had one school, the back of a parking lot with portables, because that was like the best facility we could get. That school ended up being nationally ranked as one of the top 10 schools in California and in the top 100 in the US with Newsweek
Wow.
and US News and World Report. And um, I grew with that organization and ended up, we were in Waiting for Superman, which is 10 years old now. It was a documentary by the director of Inconvenient Truth, David Guggenheim, around what happens when kids in a low-income neighborhood can't get into the charter school. So we had 400 kids on a waiting list, and we were in Redwood City, and we would bring together affluent and middle-class families with kids in the neighborhood that were more low-income, and so it was a beautiful community. And around that time when I went from becoming, so then we started getting a lot of attention when we were in the movie, and so we started to wanting to replicate the model, and so we went into the east side of San Jose, and I was the principal of that school. We're actually two. My friend and I started them, and then I became the executive director. But I tell the story because when we started that ninth grade, we had a moment where we realized that the kids from our first school that were graduating were going to college at double the national average, and then like quadruple the national average for low-income kids.
Wow.
So they're, and but then a lot of them didn't graduate. So when we got to our first graduating class from college, like 4 to 6 years in, we realized that a lot of them didn't graduate, and we knew these kids really well. We had, recruited them. We knew their families, a really tight-knit community, and we looked to see which kids were not making it through college. And the story. It was the kids that, they had to take a remedial math class, and then that they couldn't, they were working, so then they dropped out, and so we started feeling this like pain of how are we going to? We thought we were so great, but actually we're not serving the kids we want to serve the most. And so we had this moment where we reimagined our whole entire model and really started thinking like, what is the most important thing for kids and learning? And what we realized is that kids need to be self-directed. They need to be autonomous. We need to prepare them for the future. And they need to be creative, and they need to, figure out how to collaborate and like these 21st century skills that are kind of buzzworthy now. And so then when I turned 40, so in ninth grade, I had 100 kids at an old elementary school in east side of San Jose. And because what we were doing was so interesting, that the New York Times came in September. So I'd been a principal for a month, and the New York Times was arriving at a school with 100 kids in the east side of San Jose. So you can imagine what that might have looked like. A lot of kids with a lot of needs and a lot of issues. And so the New York Times arrives, and the reason they came is because for about a month, all we did was put kids on Khan Academy. So if you're not familiar with it, it's a website where the kids can go through on their own pace and watch videos, and kind of, if they're doing 7th grade math, they can do 7th grade. It's not boxed in, so it's very personalized.
Yeah.
So for a month, we just told the math teacher, hey, we're struggling the most in math from our model in Redwood City. So we want to try something new. And so go ahead and just have the kids do Khan Academy and get out of their way. And in a month, the kids in the school in San Jose were doing so much better than the kids in Redwood City for our nationally ranked model.
Wow.
And so we're like, oh, we're onto something here. So that's when we're like, okay, these kids really need to be self-directed. And so at that moment, we actually tore down the walls of the classrooms, and we had 209th and 10th graders in one big room. And we were just trying to basically figure out how do you just totally do school differently and stop doing these siloed things and just meet every kid where they're at. And that was a massive, crazy experiment. And we got tons of attention. I think we had 500 visitors that year when I was the principal. And then from that point forward, my job was to then train all of the schools that we were opening and the principals on how to do this model. And that's when I was like, oh, this is not for me. Because now I'm kind of in this middle manager role, and I'm taking someone else's vision and then teaching them how to maintain a vision. And I was like, literally my body, like my back, throughout my back, I was sick all the time. And again, now I have the language, like the universe was speaking to me and saying like, this is not your path. And so after like a good year and a half of me just like going for it and trying to do my best with this amazing organization, which I thought I would never leave. And I was in Tahoe. We were going hiking, and my family went ahead and my son fell asleep. He was 3. And I sat there, like, caught my mountaintop moment. And I just had this little whisper that said, open a school in Sacramento and build a leadership institute. Like, now I can say it like it was like so clear, but then it was just a little tiny whisper, right? And so then I was like, okay, I'm going to quit my job and start a school in Sacramento. And it'll be a K-8, which I'd never done elementary school before. But I was like, my son's going to go to kindergarten, so I probably start there rather than, you know, have a school that he wouldn't be able to go to. And then my daughter. So my daughter and my son both go to the school now. They're in 1st and 3rd grade. So that's brings me to today to say, I'm seeing the amazing things that are happening at our school. And I'm seeing how beautiful it is when you can actually rethink the paradigm and say, like, get out of the way, put kids at the center, let them drive, let them be self-directed. And then with all this work I've done through the spiritual awakening I've had, it's like, we should also let them follow their inner guidance and actually teach them not only to be self-directed and creative, which is what a lot of reformers are saying, but if you can teach them to follow their inner guidance, self-direction and creativity will just flow so beautifully.
Yeah.
We don't have to teach it. Like, because right now the idea is we have to teach kids how to be self-directed. We have to teach them how to be creative. And it's like, that's because we're working within a paradigm where we think kids need to be taught those things. So if we actually just flip the paradigm and say, hey, how about like if we kind of think about the way Maria Montessori thought about kids, how about just putting them in an environment where they can naturally flow, and then teaching them some of these, what I call timeless wisdom teachings, you know, things that are about following your intuition, following your, you know, the guidance from the universe. And that's what they already have until we condition it out of them.
Yeah.
So imagine a system where we just say, follow your inner guidance. You know what they're going to create? Like, we won't have to teach them anything about creativity, like self-direction. That would be beautiful. And I've seen just like snippets of the beauty that can happen when you create that environment, but I want to take it to an even deeper level of really helping kids find that path towards not conditioning them out of trusting their inner guidance, but actually teaching them to follow it, which is the conversation I had with my son last night. I was like, what's the feeling you're having? Don't deny it. Like, that's your intuition. I mean, did you ever have that conversation with your parents when you were 9?
No.
None of us do, right?
No.
So imagine all the teachers having those conversations.
Yeah. So it sounds to me like possibly the people who need the most, like the teaching are the adults, right? It's the parents and the teachers who are deeply entrenched in that thinking that, you know, and it comes back to, I think, this idea of, are we the carpenters or are we the gardeners with our children? Have you read that book? There's a book called The Carpenter and the Carpenter and the Gardener.
I've heard the analogy. I love it.
Yeah. And it's like, you know, if you think you're the carpenter, that means that you think that you're actually teaching, building, constructing. Right. Now, there's some stuff that our kids, obviously, that you wouldn't put them on Khan Academy and have them be self-directed. I mean, there's some stuff that you might not be able to learn without someone with that expertise teaching you.
Oh, for sure.
But it still goes to the place of, like, you know, meeting them where they are, not, you know, not being so tied into this idea that, like, math is what you have to do right now in this time period. Like, at the end of the day, we want you to have, or at the end of the week, we want you to have done these things, but you get to decide, are you going to spend one day, all day on English? Or are you going to spend that day partially on English and partially on math and partially on science?
Absolutely.
And so it's the disruption. I think what I've seen at the age of my kids right now is I just see a lot of fear around the parents of, like, well, if they do that, then their kids aren't going to be they're not going to be able to do the college thing. You know, they won't be. And so is that something that you find is one of the areas of resistance that you face?
Oh yeah, for sure. And what we found at Summit was that we didn't really nurture the parents enough. And there was actually kind of a revolt. And that was probably one of the worst days of my life. We had about 300 parents in an auditorium, like, what's going on here? Like, you know, that whole scene you picture, like people throwing pitchforks and torches.
Yeah.
It was that one of those moments. And thank God the founder and CEO actually took it for me. She's like, I'm not gonna make you stand in front of those parents. But I was there. And so, yeah, I think the parents, and then I thought, oh, if I went down to a kindergarten, so I strategically started this school with just kindergarten, first grade. So I was like, then we can really do things that are interesting and break down paradigms and, you know, nurture people into something different. But even at this age, and even in a community that's not all about college, you know, it's a more of a working class community, there's still, everyone's so conditioned in the paradigm of what school is. Like, why don't you have more homework? Why isn't the report card have this? Why don't we have, you know, this? And honestly, it's the parents and then the teachers too. And it's not their fault. I mean, all of this education schools teach you to do the factory model that we all went to school in. So now we have to find teachers that are trying to teach in this way, but also do it differently. But then they've been trained. I mean, it's this whole situation that's really complicated. So what I have found throughout all of my schools, 10 schools I've started, is that it's really hard to find the right adults that are willing to do this work. And then it's really hard to get the parents to jump on board because it's so scary. And they're more scared in high school. They're a little more, okay, K through 6, K through 8, yeah, I can see. But the number one question I always get is, what's going to happen with my kid when they go to high school? And I'm like, ooh, let's dig underneath that. So I don't say that, but I think it. Then I answer it this way. I say, well, here's the deal. Your kids are going to spend 9 years in a K-8 where they're doing projects every day. They're self-directing and they're learning to go deep within their social emotional learning capacity. When they're in high school, like, first of all, they're going to get into any choice high school in Sacramento County because they're going to be like the best applicants. And they're going to be able to figure it out. You know what's going to happen to them? They're going to be bored to death because they're going to be in a factory model where the teacher lectures for an hour, but they'll figure it out. And you know, you might end up just having them go to an independent study, or I don't know, or they'll figure it out, but it's not going to be bad for them. It's only going to be better for them. And then at some point they'll figure it out. So yeah, it's definitely that. And I think I think with this COVID crisis, what I've really started to see is that it's a social paradigm that needs to be shifted. And I wrote an article back when the college scandal hit. I think it was like October, where, you know, you had the celebrities paying off people in that whole scandal that I think many of us know about. And I started to write it, and at that point I wasn't confident enough to actually publish it. But now I'm kind of starting to talk about it. But I literally kept saying, I'm calling BS on the whole entire system. Like, the whole entire system is so broken. And not only talking about the education system, I'm talking about the social paradigm that we're preparing kids for the rat race, to the point that the most affluent 1% people that have the most power and money are willing to do these crazy things to get their kids into these schools because they're so nervous about the rat race we're preparing them for. And so it's a complex problem, to say the least.
It is a complex problem, and that's why I think I'm so appreciative of your courage in going out there, and you know, all of us that are out there trying to say, wait, can't we do something different? Isn't there some other thing we can imagine for ourselves? And but it is really, it is a tricky situation because we do need the adults, we do need the parents and the teachers and leaders to be, some of them, getting on board, because we can't, it would be nice to say, so I remember talking to a guy that he was starting a school, and it was a high school, and he wanted to make a lot of the changes and do a lot of the things that you're talking about, but in a high school. But it was clear that doing K through 8 is an easier place to do that, because you know, you get your kindergartners. A lot of people don't even really, they're okay with their kindergartners and their first graders taking a slower ramp up. But he said to me one time, because of the work that I do, which is mainly, I was working with parents with the intention of my ultimate thing is I care about the kids. And he said, you know, why don't you go right to the kids? And, you know, let's start a school together. And I wanted to, but it didn't work out. It didn't work out for a bunch of other reasons, but it still doesn't, it's even then, yes, you might go right to the kids, but those kids still go home to the parents, and those parents still make those parents are the ones showing up, the 300 parents, saying this. So we have to have somewhere, there have to be enough people who are saying like, yes, we need to do something different. And I have this feeling that I listen, there is a lot of suffering going on
Yeah,
right now with
yeah,
the, pandemic, and there are a lot of unknowns, and we have no
yeah,
idea that we could go back to school, God willing, in the fall, and parents are just so happy to have the structure
yeah,
that they're like, I don't care if it was factory model, we're just happy
yeah,
to be back to
yeah,
normal.
yeah.
Or we might be really in a massive disruption, and I have this feeling that there's a real strong possibility that we're in a massive disruption. And yeah. And so what do we do now?
Yeah. Well, it's the Pema Chodron. I think it's how you say her name, when things fall apart. So I do think this is a massive, I've been talking about. So first of all, the COVID-19 crisis, no matter where we are in the process, is really super painful, super hard. But it's also, and it's happening for us.
Yeah,
Like, it's happening to help us wake up. And one of my videos I did is like, what is normal? 1 in 3 teens having anxiety,
I know.
kids outsourcing, parents outsourcing their kids 8, 10, 12 hours a day. All the frenzy, the grind, the rat race that we all are just kind of like, wait, why are we doing that? And I want to also share that obviously everyone's in a different place. And I know there still are frontline workers. So there's a lot of things I'm saying that, I don't want people to say like, oh, what do you mean? We're still going to work every day. But what you're bringing light
Right.
to is that this is a massive disruption in our world. And the shift that you're talking about is the same feeling I'm having, which is why I've been so supercharged in the last few weeks, because since we got the shelter in place, it's like I feel this call, like literally I've had this download from the universe for 4 years now, that there's a leadership institute and then there's a complete reimagining of the school system. And so I think this is the moment where, and again, let's talk about the system. The system's not broken. The system's doing what it was intended to do.
Hmm.
And so there's a factory model system that was 18 something, 1860, 1880, 1890, around the late 1800s, that was built to prepare for the majority of the kids to go to factories and a small number to go on to universities, a small number to be middle managers, and a bunch of kids to go on trade schools, right? So that was the system that was built, and it was designed to do that. The problem is we haven't actually changed much.
Right.
And again, it's not, this is very important because I'm a teacher and I love teachers, and it is not the teacher's fault, because there's this whole thing about like blame the teachers, and I'm not going to stand by that. So the teachers are just doing what they're trained to do, and they do amazing things. So you go to like a traditional public school or any traditional school, you'll always find the one teacher or multiple teachers that are hiding on the corner that are doing really cool things, because they're just trying to work within the system to do that what they know is best for kids. And so this moment is here to show us that this model is not built for the time we're in. And so it's going to help us shift the social paradigm. And then what I'm really dreaming about is why I want to build this platform is because of what you were saying, which is right now there's so much. Okay, so before COVID, there's so much fear. So how did you get people to, for example, we started Summit Prep in 2006. And our founder had to go out in 2006 and tell people in the Bay Area, where there's a lot of conditioning around, achievement and all that, that if you join this little school, we're going to be radically different and your kids will get to college. Like, you're the type of parent that would have been like, okay, I'll try it, but you're in the minority. So then as I'm hearing you talk, I'm like, yeah, she would totally have jumped in. She would have been like, yeah, let's go for it, And then we built it with the parents and all that. And we did the same thing in San Jose. But so before that, you had like a small group of people that were jumping in. And now, as time's gone on, in my like 10 years of starting that school in San Jose and then starting this next school and seeing the trajectory, more and more people are starting to question and like scratch their head. The homeschooling market has doubled 3 to 6% in the last 5 years. It
Hmm.
used to be the far right and the far left, and now it's a bunch of people in between. So that's happened before COVID. And now we're talking about 55 million at home, and just in this country, that are not choosing to homeschool. That might be asking themselves, this is interesting. Like, this is really hard, but there could be a way out of this. So what I want the web platform to do is to take an opportunity for this moment where people are wondering and thinking, well, we've already been thrown in to this. This is like our massive, spiritual crisis. Like, we just had a heart attack, whatever happened where you have to wake up. And now it's like, what are we going to do out of this moment? And so what I want to do is really amplify the schools that I've seen across the world, like the Green School in Bali, like Acton Academy in Austin, and these different really cool schools start looking at a lot of these micro schools, start looking at really different models that can allow people to see, you know, like when you buy a house, and if it's not staged, you know, you might get one offer. If it's staged, you get 100 offers. Like, people need to see what's possible. And right now we only know, and school is the most difficult thing to change because everyone went through the school system. So even though as a parent, you know, like when I talk to parents, no matter what income level, no matter what education level, no race, ethnicity, they all get it. They're like, yeah, you're right. Why are we doing worksheets still? Why are we still doing 41 minutes of math and 32 minutes of reading? And like, why is it all so structured and just kind of like kids are zoned out? But then they're so scared because that's what they did, and it's so ingrained in your paradigm. If I asked you to like throw out your cable system, like try a different cable company, yeah, we did that. It's called Net. It's like, it's not that hard. You know, you're like, oh, it's cable, whatever. But now we're talking about your own children, and we're talking about what you think school should be. And even the most risky, rebellious parent is going to say, oh, that's okay. And the teacher, you know, but then they start to get nervous. So anyway,
They
so the
definitely do.
theory with the web platform is you start to highlight, it's globally. It's not just the US, because all the school systems are basically the same, except for Finland. Finland has one of the best ones in the world. So if you're interested in looking at a model, we used to call our schools Summit Finland or whatever. And then I always call my school now like Growth Finland, because it's about deeper learning. It's about, there's no standardized tests. Like, oh, the Finnish model is really beautiful. And then the critics will say, well, yeah, but they're very homogeneous and it's a small country. Okay, whatever. It's still a beautiful model. But taking those types of examples and really amplifying and highlighting them and saying like, this is so possible. So if you're Deb and you're in your community and you have a 10th grader right now and you're like, I just don't know what to do, we're going to connect you with 100 more people in your community that are thinking the same thing and give you the tools and resources to just do something. That's the goal. And then it's going to be a community where you can connect in person with your community, but you also can connect online, and you can, you know, like we did with the Shafali course, I have people all over the world now that I'm besties with because we spent a year in this really intense course. And like you and I had never talked other than Facebook, but I knew you. Remember I said to you, oh yeah, you would always make these great thoughtful comments when I was like, what do I do with my son? He doesn't want to go soccer practice. You know, and Deb would jump on and be like, well, have you thought about your own conditioning? And we're always very nice and gently and politely, like, maybe he doesn't need to go to soccer practice. Maybe that's about your own desire to achieve. And I was like, yes, she nailed it. So having that connection across the world where you can be, you know, okay, Deb wants to start a little small high school in her community with 100 kids. Now let's find 100 more Debs or 100 more communities that want to start schools across the world, and then connect them and create the resources and tools to get them to do it. And now's the time, because now everything's different. So why would we not be willing to take the risk now? And like you said, some people might just be like, let me just get them back into school so I can take a breath. It is really hard to be home with your kids all day, no matter the age.
I know personally, I'm more impacted and inspired to consider something different for my kids, which I think that I was just kind of going with it. Like, my kids weren't interested in doing anything different. They were just happy to be with their friends. And I think they're even a little bit more like, well, we seem to be doing okay.
Yeah.
And
Especially if we could go start seeing our friends now, and then we could do this with our friends, and I'd be fine. That's what my son keeps saying. He's like, I'd love homeschooling if I could just see my friends.
yeah. And so that's what I even see is like, it's almost like we need to learn from our homeschooling families, how to have a hybrid, because what you talked about before is like, this is a social kind of system that's being disrupted. And I'm like, cautious, because listen, I'm actually pretty much a believer that like conscious capitalism is the way to go. I'm not fully bought into like socialism as the answer. And, so I have a lot of inner conflict about, saying things like, oh, everything's broken and when you just disrupt everything. Cause I think that without something to replace it, I think that's also risky.
Yeah.
So I have a lot of
Right.
dialogue about, that I don't feel like I have all the answers, but I do think one of the things that you mentioned that I just want to talk about is just that these parents that want to send their kid back to school because it's been hard. Part of that is because that's broken too.
Can I share an example? This is another thing that I think could be really cool, is when I got a phone call from Eric Ries a couple of years ago, who wrote the Lean Startup, and he called me and he said, And we didn't know each other directly through on my time at Summit Public Schools, but we used his book to reimagine our schools, the Lean Startup. We actually used those business principles to iterate and test our model when he tore down the walls. So he knew of us, and so he found me. And what he said to me is like, and this is a couple of years ago, homeschooling is like the most untapped market, from like a business perspective. There's so much there, because he had a kid that was about to start kindergarten, and he lives in San Francisco. And I tell the story because I think that there are so many opportunities to really look at what homeschool could be, or, the homeschool model is like a different model. And then one example is a school. I believe I'm going to use it. I'm going to tell this, and it might be not totally exactly right, but I'm going to do like a summary. It's called Oku, and I believe it's in Orange County. And I think the way it works is it's like a community center. So it's either a 501c3 or an LLC. It's not a school. And that they offer enrichment classes. So music, art, like all the things that are like the best learning, right? They call it enrichment, but they offer learning. And then the kids that attend the school do an independent study charter school. And then my understanding is that the independent study charter school either pays the OKU directly or to the parents, and then the parent so each parent gets a certain amount of money from the charter school for doing independent study, which comes from the state of California. And then they choose with their dollar. And this is, you don't have to have the means to be home with your kid, because you can, you have to be able to be home for a couple of times, part of the week. But for half of the week, you can have your kid in this community center, and it's paid for. So it's just, you see what I'm getting at? It's like this beautiful model that we can't even think of. And it'll allow so many more parents. A lot of our families are in my school, not all of them, but there's a good number of parents coming from the Bay Area to Sacramento that are pretty like working class. They don't have tons of a huge income, but one of the parents stays home because they've made a choice. For the parents that have two, a lot of the families only have, one parent at home or grandparent, but for the parents that have two at home, a lot of them have just chosen, like, we're going to live on not a lot, and because I want to be home with the kid. And so those types of parents this kind of model of OKU would just be like a normal family, not some family that has, a parent that could stay home all day, every day because they have the income. That could actually work for like a lot of families and have, so those kind of models, I think, are the types of things I want to show to people, so that we can see that there's so many different opportunities and ways to think about this. And then what that does is that gets you out of the paradigm of, the 9 to 3, the 42-minute schedules, all the things that parents are so stuck to.
Yeah. So if you can share a little bit about, how people can find you, what what this platform is. And I think the best thing is how people can find you so that they can watch you evolve in this, since this is something you're building. It doesn't all exist right now.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, so I think the easiest place is to go to davidkrichards.com, which is my website for my coaching and everything else. And then eventually, by the time this is released, it'll probably be up, is heartofthematter.io. So Heart of the Matter, all in one word.io, which is where the web platform will rest. And then if you're interested in checking out the school, it's growthps.org. And then we do have a Facebook group, Heart of the Matter, that is convening and joining and having these conversations. So those are the places where you can find us. And then I am launching a podcast called Heart of the Matter, Leading a Conscious Way Forward. And it'll be all about this kind of stuff. It'll be about leadership and how all of these conversations we've been having about the social paradigm really is about how do we reimagine our leadership too, so that, what are we doing to lead forward as a society? And then obviously the pieces about reimagining education. And then a piece we didn't get into as much, maybe in the next conversation, is really around how do we heal forward and how do we heal ourselves and others through this really trying time, which I know you have a lot of opinions about and we all have been thinking about. So that's the best place to find me. And I really appreciate the time. It was awesome.
Yeah, this has been super fun. Does the IO stand for Inside Out?
Oh, it's just, I think because .coms are so, it's like when you change the area code for the cell phones, they're just adding like .app and .io. It's just another .com or .org.
But what's IO mean though? It usually means something, like,
I don't know.
No?
That's a good question.
I think it's Inside Out.
I'll have to look. Let's make it Inside Out.
I think
There
it
you
should
go.
be.
That's what I'm going to say from here on out. Yep, that's what we're going to make it. And then we'll look it up and see.
All right, cool. It was so great to talk to you. I love it. You have so much great stuff to share. I feel like we are going to need to get back on very soon. All right. Thank you.